People only know what someone tells them, right? Well, let's get into it. See, you have to understand the rules because in any game, depending on the game that you're playing, you have to understand the rules. Now, I have an outline here and I'm going to probably go off more of this, and so you'll see me close my book later on. But in order to play a game, you have to understand the rules, right? The media dictates stuff to the public, so on and so forth, etc. And there's a lot of word of mouth that goes on. You would learn this if you understood marketing, right? Most people that aren't in marketing wouldn't understand this. So they would be very, very confused if you understand what I'm saying. So let's get into it, shall we? Because when you're playing a game such as, let's say, Monopoly, Life, Risk, Battleship, chess, checkers, and so on and so forth, StarCraft, World of Warcraft, which is pretty much playing out right now because in World of Warcraft, everybody's individual character. They could choose to do stuff whether or not they want to or do their own thing, whereas StarCraft broke things up into 3 factions, so on and so forth. Then you have games like Sims, SimCity, so on and so forth. So let's continue, right? So one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, can the rules be changed? Well, if you look at government, so on and so forth, they may not change all the rules, but they may add rules to counteract other rules, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to keep the Bill of Rights or the amendments, so on and so forth, but we're going to add to the amendments until it works in some type of favor, right? Because the other ones, yeah, they're all right. We don't want to follow all those rules, so we're going to make some more rules, so on and so forth. And then we have different states that have their own rules. So think of it like the game Monopoly, right? In Monopoly, if you run out of money, are the rules there to dictate that you could borrow money from the bank, right? Or you can leverage your properties, right? This would be something you would learn if you were in real estate, if you were an investor, so on and so forth. There's the get out of jail free card that, people understand in Monopoly, so on and so forth. Sorry, I have my ring on here. And so when it comes to it was a little tight on this finger, so I wanted to put it on this hand because it's a little looser, so on and so forth. But the get out of jail free card, right? Now, that's a certain rule, right, that can be put in whether you're playing a digital form of Monopoly or the board game, right? You either pay a fine or a fee, otherwise known as bail, etc., or you actually have a get out of jail free card. Why would you have a get out of jail free card? Maybe because you took a chance, so on and so forth, or you landed on the thing that says chance, and then you would take the card and it says, hey, you get to get out of jail free one time, give or take, right? Etc. So what happens when you borrow money from the bank and you have maybe a couple pieces of property? Well, you could leverage your property and say, okay, whatever payments I collect on this, the bank could go ahead and take the money out of there. So I would never touch the money. I'll just use the loan to acquire other pieces of property. And when you go around and land on Park Place or Boardwalk or wherever, whether they have a house or a hotel or whatever it's called, or an apartment building on that location, then that would go ahead and cover the loan, and the cycle can continue, and then hopefully you could get yourself out of debt. The goal is to not only get out of debt, but to control the board, right? Just like in Mahjong, right? You want to take over, or Go, I think it is, right? You want to take over as much land as possible, much territory as possible, and then build on top of it, like in Monopoly, so that you can have market share, but you can have, control in the area, and then the power, i.e. capital, i.e. money, so on and so forth, that you make from the people that's living there, can go ahead and be then leveraged, right? So what do I mean by all of this when I'm getting into it? By the way, if you got any value out of this, go ahead and smash that like button. Don't forget to follow me. Remember, I speak in a philosophical manner, so not many people will understand this, and it will be difficult for some psychologists to, tap into because of, the logical side of psychology. The clue is in the word itself. I'm sure you could spell logic with that, but philosophy is a little bit different. It's more artistic. So if you're understanding why I use the analogies and the metaphors of the games, then you will understand everything else. So I strongly implore you to study philosophy and different ways things can relate to other things. Now, when it comes to the next point I want to make, I don't want anybody to feel offended by this. Let me do a mic check real quick. Okay. So I don't want anybody to feel offended by this, but there was a saying that went around, and I don't know if it still goes around today, but the saying goes like this: one person's trash is someone else's treasure. But what does that mean, really? Well, when you put it in that context with the content and the way it's delivered, whether it's one man's trash is another man's treasure, so on and so forth, or one person's trash is another person's treasure, what does that mean? Well, some people can take it logically and, well, tangibly and be like, oh, well, it means about people. And if somebody doesn't want me, somebody else will want me out there. Yes, that's also true. But what happens when it could be pertained to other things? When I lived in California, I knew that if I went to Hollywood and, Malibu and those areas, there would be certain individuals that had a lot of money and they would like to keep up with the Joneses, think the Kardashians, so on and so forth, right? So they would get rid of their furniture, so on and so forth, etc. Sometimes donate it to places like Goodwill or Salvation Army. And then guess what? Goodwill and Salvation Army will go ahead and sell it to you at bottom dollar because nobody wanted it. It was a donation. They're just looking to break even and cover the salaries of the employees. Now, what I used to do was I used to go to those stores in the rich areas and then go see how those items looked and sold for online. Now you could do this with Amazon, you could do this with eBay, and so much more, right? So if you know a rich area in your neighborhood, go to the Goodwill in that area, and I promise you there's probably going to be something of value that was once looked at as trash that was donated, and then now you can go ahead and purchase that and then resell it and make some money for yourself, i.e. finding treasure, right? Then there's other things out there, right? Like when Gary Vaynerchuk talks about undervalued attention, so on and so forth. Oh, I don't like these platforms. Google is too dominant. Let's use Safari. No, not Safari. Let's use the new one that's coming out, etc. Well, the reason why is because, well, there's a lot of things that go on the bigger you become, right? When you float something on the stock market, which is the terminology that has been used for a while now, right? They're going to float a company on the stock market. But what does that mean? Is that a naval term? Is that a maritime term? Or is that like just jargon that they use when they say they're going to float stock on the stock market, right? With an IPO, right? So we have to understand these things because this is how you succeed in life, right? But there's also nefarious actors out there that will listen to everything, and because they control the board, they will block you and try to mitigate the ways you make money. Why? Because they will take your information, because remember, and I'm going to say this in another video, information is the most valuable form of currency. And there was a couple movies, I think there was one called Safe House with Denzel Washington and Ryan Reynolds, and he was selling secrets all over the place and people wanted to kill him, this, that, and the third. So remember that for you future endeavors out there that want to sell secrets. Somebody might come after you. Anyways, is the money game, let's just say that, is the money game understood well? Well, that depends, right? Because it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the game that it's being used in, right? Is money being used in Battleship? Probably not. Is money being used in StarCraft? Probably. Otherwise known as minerals, Vespian gas, for those of you who still play, so on and so forth. Remember, Kerrigan ended up in the other StarCraft game once she got cured. I think she was a redhead, so on and so forth. And I think she was a sniper, if I remember correctly. But she had to go back temporarily in order to talk to everyone as far as who was a part of the Zerg to get them to understand certain things. Now, the reason I use this analogy, well, is because everything that, is in society today is based upon the gamification of learning and game theory, which goes or comes from higher levels of education, right? If you study game theory, you would understand certain things. Prisoners would understand prisoners' dilemma. If you're in law enforcement, psychologists would understand game theory from a certain analytical point of view. Philosophers would understand this and probably smirk and laugh because, well, then once you bring that into play, philosophers would normally ask, what are the morals, ethics, and the rules within the game? Because I'll give you an example. I was in a pre-law class and we had to do a mock trial. And Gary Yunt, I think it was Yunt or Yost, one of them, but he was a former attorney from California. And we had to do a mock trial, so on and so forth. And I remember we were going through everything. I read through all the evidence and he threw a curveball like I never saw before. He literally interjected and presented new evidence without the other side seeing it and was like, oh, the person needed to wear glasses. That's why they got into the car accident, right? So I was like, please tell me. I said, there's nothing in here that says anything about glasses. I even looked at the driver's license. There's nothing there that this person needed to wear glasses. Well, it just so happens that afterwards, I did win the mock trial. However, afterwards, I asked him, I said, why did he do that? He said, because just like in life, in the courtroom, things are going to happen that are unexpected. And if you are not prepared, in other words, you should stay ready so you don't have to get ready, if that makes sense, right? This is why we go to the gym. This is why we work out. This is why we go on walks or runs, so on and so forth. You want to stay ready so you don't have to get ready, right? Because what happens if your cardio is not good? Well, you're going to run out of breath very quickly, right? Especially if you're running from danger. What happens if you have to pick someone up and run with them? Firefighters understand this because they also carry weight with them, like an oxygen tank, so on and so forth, when they go into the fire to pull people out of a burning building. Police officers understand this when they have their bulletproof vest and the utility belt, so on and so forth, and then they have to go chase someone down with that extra weight, right? Same concept applies in life. What happens if your friend, you go out dancing or you go out to a club and they get strongly intoxicated and you got a fireman carry them all the way up 3 flights of stairs? Yes, I'm speaking from personal experience, but you got a fireman carry them up 3 flights of stairs, so on and so forth, bring them back to their own room, stay with them for the night, so on and so forth, make sure they're alive, and then, do your thing the rest of the weekend because maybe they got a little bit carried away, but they trusted you, so they knew you would take care of them. So to understand this is to understand the title, right? People only understand what other people tell them. So you can't always listen to rumors because if you don't do your due diligence or investigations, well, then you're just going to go based off of what's known as hearsay. Oh, she said this, he said that, blah, blah, yippity yap, blah, 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 blah. And I'm taking that from someone that I look up to. However, it's one of those things that not only plays out today, it's been playing out. And if you don't question some of the things that are happening, or being said, well, then you too may fall prey to whatever somebody tells you. And you might just believe it. And you don't know if they're guiding you in the right path or the wrong path, right? Because is there any right or wrong? Well, then again, that comes back to the rules. So if you got anything out of this video, go ahead and smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video of Finding Freedom. Peace.